You're listening to PumaPodcast.
Yun din yung sad kasi ang dami ng almost every month may martial law survivor na ayun, ang sad lang din na yun, hindi na nila naabutan yung museum that's supposedly a memorial for them.
A museum memorializing the victims of the Marcos dictatorship was supposed to open in 2022, but is facing a 4-year delay. In this episode, we ask a hard question. Does a museum like this one still matter in a world where another Marcos sits in Malacañang? I'm Bella Perez Rubio, Puma Podcast, and you're listening to Teka Teka.
Yung original talagang plan is that by 2022, which is yung 50th year marking the declaration of martial law, dun talaga siya dapat open, supposedly. Pero ang daming naging series of problems na hinarap nung panahon ni Duterte.
That's James Olivar of the Human Rights Violations Victims Memorial Commission, or MEMCOM for short. He's officer in charge of the museum division.
Kasi yung budget for this, yung 400 million, nasa trust fund siya. So wala siya yung sa general appropriations na every year dapat maglalapse. Pero ang sabi daw nila, naglapse na daw yung trust fund. So gusto siyang bawiin na dapat. So nalaban. So we have the money. Tapos ngayon naman yung problem is yung lupa sa loob ng UP kung saan siya gagawin. May building kasi yung UPCMO. So, yung naging agreement is i-demolish yun, papagawaan sila ng bagong building, which is ginawa na ng Memorial Commission, may building na silang bago, pero hindi pa sila nag-move out. Ayun. So, mga 2 years na yun na nangyayari.
The plan is to build the Freedom Memorial Museum on a sprawling 1.4-hectare lot near the UP Fine Arts Gallery. In the meantime, MEMCOM has opened a gallery in their office along Panay Avenue that serves as a preview of what the museum will be. Part of the display is a small-scale model of what the museum will look like once built.
So ito yung winning design nung ginawa yung the Freedom Memorial Museum na competition, architectural competition. And 217 yung sumali na architects and in teams of architects. And ito yung nanalo, yung The Fall of Brutal. Ayun yung tawag nila sa design nila. So it's a fall of brutal kasi ito yung brutalist structure na madalas ginagamit ng panahon ng martial law, CCP, etc.
Check our show notes if you'd like to see a photo of the design.
And then ito is the fist na parang nagka-crack dun from the brutalist structure. And it also resembles a flower daw. Kasi yung basihan nila dito, yung iconic image nung people power, na yung fist na may hawak na flower. So, yun, symbolizing yung nangyari nung people power. And then yung cracks around the area, yun yung human rights that we have.
In part 1 of this story, you can listen in as James takes our team on a tour of the Freedom Memorial Museum Gallery. There are 9 sections, all dedicated to documenting various rights abuses perpetrated by the Marcos dictatorship. A number of them are viscerally upsetting, including a wall of torture and the blood-stained clothes a student activist was wearing as he was shot by state forces.
Very heavy.
Is it hard to give this tour?
Yeah, every time. Yun din yung mahirap for us.
Have you ever had like a situation where you were giving the tour and then it became contentious, like someone came and parang...
May time before na hindi naman naging super issue, pero may someone na from the government. Tapos medyo lang siya, na-shock lang siya na ganito daw pala yung ginawa ng state forces. Pero sabi niya hindi rin naman daw kasi tama yung ginawa ng NPA or ng communist, gano'n. So yung lang din, parang yung saktong, yeah, it was me. Yun pala yung sinasabi niya na hindi naman to lahat, it's impossible daw na lahat ito utos ni former President Marcos. Sabi ko, well, yun din yung important na discussion, no, na it's also impossible din na lahat to super aware siya, pero that's the culture that was created during that time. And it's also like the pattern of what happened during the time of Duterte, na hindi naman lahat order talaga niya exactly, pero gumawa siya ng ganong culture of impunity na he gave, or at least na feel ng mga tao, ng mga state forces na they can do this and they have the power to do this.
Ano sabi?
Parang sa niya, okay, parang ganun. And may mga kasama din siyang friends na ganun din yung point of view. So, medyo natulungan siya. And yun din, hindi siya makapaniwala siya sa wall. Dun siya talaga na na parang bakit daw kailangan yun gawin? Or paano nagawa ng isang tao yun? Yung ganyang klaseng kabrutal.
More from James and the other people behind the Freedom Memorial Museum after a quick break. Another display in Memcom's gallery is the role of victims. It's a very long list of the 11,103 officially recognized victims of the dictatorship.
And you mentioned there are people who are actually on this list who have been here.
Yeah,
What was it like to tour them and how did they react?
I've been with martial law survivors. Ako dati yung nagko-coordinate with them kasi may group of martial law survivors kami, yung Survivors Hub. So sila usually nagiging pool namin if we need speakers, and may event sila lagi yung kasama namin. Very enthusiastic sila. Up until today, very active. Sumasali sila sa mga events and very positive yung outlook nila. May anger, pero mas nangingibabaw yung we have to do something about this or we have to continue doing something kasi it's still happening. So yun yung energy na nakukuha. And yung usual na energy na nakukuha ko from them.
How do they feel about the delay?
Ayun din, every year din nangungulit, pero and dapat din naman talaga. Pero naiintindihan din nila yung limitations. And actually, ang daming survivors. Before, maraming gustong mag-donate ng collections nila sa amin. And then nung nanalo si BBM, inurong yung mga collections. Pero hindi namin sila masisi kasi at the end of the day, government agency, yung Memorial Commission. So yung iba meron pa ring doubts. And yun, may fear sila na baka one day biglang mawala or may mangyari sa commission. Pero ayun, very supportive naman sila sa mga projects.
Operationally though, did you feel a shift when BBM won? Like any difficulty?
Weirdly, yun yung fear ng executive director namin and kami when BBM won. Pero up until today, wala kaming naging any major issue. Actually, parang parang mas tahimik kasi hindi ginagalaw, hindi naging issue yung budget. Actually, I think nadagdagan pa kami ng budget. Pero ayun, walang anything kaming naririnig.
And you mentioned also that, there were victims who didn't maybe feel so comfortable giving their things to the museum now that BBM's president. And that is, you said you understand why. And it is odd, like for example, the PCGG, he's the president and it's a presidential commission tasked with recovering the money his parents stole. Does he exercise the same oversight over this commission?
Ayun. Luckily naman sa Memorial Commission, very unique din kasi yung composition ng commission. I don't think, isa siya sa mga pinaka-unique kasi hindi kami directly linked to the president. Tapos, what we have is a board of trustees. So we have, yung chair namin is yung Commission on Human Rights. And then yung co-chair, I think, is the National Historical Commission of the Philippines. Then part din ng Board of Trustees namin si NCCA, DepEd, CHED, and then the UP Library. So sila yung nagde-decide, sila talaga yung may nagde-decide, kunyari may applicants kami na kailangan i-confirm or big projects. Sila yung nagbibigay ng decisions for us.
Speaking of Memcom's executive director, Chuck Crisanto, here he is talking about the Freedom Memorial Museum.
The significance of this is unprecedented. This is the first time in Philippine history that a state, the Freedom Memorial Museum Gallery, admits and presents how the state hurt its citizens during the Marcos martial law period.
The Marcos dictatorship changed the very fabric of our nation. We made history when we toppled it with a peaceful revolution. We made history again when we recovered some of the billions they plundered and used it to compensate their victims and to fund this museum. We also wrote an entirely new constitution to ensure that it would never happen again. As I toured this gallery, a preview of the larger museum held back by delays, I thought of another conversation I had with Ruben Carranza, a former commissioner of the PCGG. We were talking about the decades-long and ongoing effort to recover the Marcos family loot. The PCGG, as you heard earlier, is in a much tougher position than MEMCOM. Technically, they answer to the president, and the current president has every reason to obstruct their work. But Ruben told me something I'll never forget. There is no deadline for the efforts to recover the Marcoses' ill-gotten wealth. It was written into one of the final provisions of our Constitution.
It's a clause that says that efforts to recover ill-gotten wealth are not barred by time. They can be pursued forever against not just the public officials who originally acquired ill-gotten wealth, but also their heirs, their descendants. Not just Marcos, but also Marcos Jr., and not just Marcos Jr., but also the children and grandchildren of Marcos Jr. can be sued to recover ill-gotten wealth that they inherit.
The effort might slow down or grind to a halt altogether under Marcos Jr., but he can't hold it forever. The same goes for our memory, and that's why this museum and all others like it still matter. Some Filipinos may have forgotten for now, but they can be made to remember again. And this museum is part of that fight. From the conversation James had with the government official who walked in not really grasping the gravity of martial law's atrocities, but walked away with a better understanding, to the survivors who have already flocked to the interim gallery to see their names on one of the displays, and the survivors who hope to see the full-fledged museum before they go, and leave their losses, their victories, and lessons learned behind for the next generations. May Rodriguez wrote for the underground press during martial law. She was taken captive and tortured by soldiers. She's now executive director of the Bantayog ng Mga Bayani. Here she is speaking in a promotional video released by MEMCOM.
Iba rin yung level nun pag gobyerno na ang nagsasabi mismo na ang sabi sa batas, responsibilidad ng Estado na nagkaroon ng pagmamalupit sa panahon ni Marcos, responsibilidad ng Estado na i-compensate yung mga nasaktan at responsibilidad ng Estado na magtayo ng museum para maalala yung ganong pang-aabuso at para hindi na ulit makakalimutan at hindi na ulit mauulit.
What would you like to see in the Freedom Memorial Museum when it opens? Sound off in the comments on Spotify or tell us on social media. Again, I'm Bella Perez Rubio. Pidoy Blanco edited this episode. Our executive producer is Jill Caro, and our editor-in-chief is Carl Javier. Check out part 1 of this episode if you'd like to go on an audio tour of MEMCOM's Martial Law Gallery. Thanks for listening.